Memphis and was, I don't know if you want to say consciously or not, or but took up playing. You know, punk had sort of come to Memphis by that point, and Alex was into, you know, situations where, you know, and Alex, for those of you who don't know, Alex was an amazing guitarist and completely musical and, you know, way better than probably most people know.
He kept working on it all his life. He kept getting better.
And but he wanted to, I think when he returned to Memphis, maybe it was the exposure in CBGB's or where he was at in life. He wanted to play with people who were sort of, in some ways, rank amateurs, and that's, of course, where the Panther Burns and Tav Falco, you know, come up. And, you know, Alex played with them and started up. But the interesting story is, you know, Tav Falco was really more of a performance artist and in theater background. And I guess as the story goes, as Jim Dickinson told me one time, you know, Tav was playing some event at the Orpheum Theater in '78, which is a very, you know, austere kind of theater in Memphis. And Tav asked to play, and he came out, you know, in a tuxedo and began playing, I think, a Leadbelly song, and started, you know, in the middle or towards the end of it, started sawing the guitar with a chainsaw, cutting through it, and is, of course, making this incredible feedback noise and just like an explosion at the Orpheum. And, you know, most people are completely horrified by it, you know, running, covering their ears. And, of course, Alex is just laughing his head off. And immediately afterwards goes and seeks out Tav and points to him and says, "You and me, we're a band." So that was kind of the start of that relationship. Now, did you guys, and obviously he sort of, Alex kind of went out of the Ardent sphere, you know, and during that period. John, what was your take in terms of when he came back to Memphis? I don't know how much you were, you know, in touch with him at that point.
It would be sporadically, and you know, he did some of the solo recording that he did. Some of that was done at Sam Phillips, but then, you know, he did a lot of projects at Ardent. He worked on Panther Burns stuff here, and of course produced the Cramps album here. So he would be in and out of the studio fairly frequently, and you know, except for the period that he was in New York and the initial period that he was in New Orleans, I've kept more or less regularly in touch with him from 1967 on.
Right. And Chris, talk a little bit about, I guess, I don't know, you know, for you as, and anybody can jump in, as you see Alex's career, you know, when he goes, eventually went to New Orleans, I think in '81 or '82, and, you know, sort of dried out, sobered up in some ways. He was sort of leading a life of excess, I think, towards the end in Memphis, but, and kind of was out of music for a year or two actively, and then was during this period that obviously Big Stars begins to be sort of rediscovered and talked about in a sort of generation of alternative acts like REM and the Replacements and stuff. I mean, this it was '84, I think the Replacements, you know, he started opening some shows for them and started playing. What was your sense of, you know, you saw the changes in Alex when he came back in that sort of '80s period, and anybody can speak to this, where he was doing sort of interpretive things. I mean, where for you, what happened, I guess, it was just another avenue for him musically to pursue?
Well, when I played with him, we were always doing covers. I mean, things he loved, you know, and songs that spoke to either what was going on in his life or his Memphis heritage. Maybe there were more covers during that time, but it seemed of a continuum to me. So I don't know what else to say. I do think I would see him. I felt like he was going through the real book a little bit. He was learning more about jazz standards and, you know, the record he did, Cliché. I think, you know, that was a new vocabulary for him.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the songs that Alex starts doing and did in later years, you know, you kind of come to find out that the jazzier stuff or the standards were a lot of the things that, you know, his family was playing or he was listening to, or records that were around, you know. So he was, in some ways, coming full circle with some of that stuff in terms of, you know, the
also remember how great a singer he was. I think people are sometimes, you go to clubs and you see one act after another and it's really loud and people have different points of view, but, you know, Alex walked on stage and he was really a singer. And it's rarer than you think. I mean, you gotta, I cannot possibly criticize him for wanting to sing whatever he wanted. I mean,
to add to that, when John and Ken and I got together with Alex for the show in Columbia, Missouri, the university, did we play Duke of Earl then?
No, that came later.
That came later.
Yeah.
But at any rate, all of a sudden we launch into Duke of Earl, and you know, I'm back there laughing and smiling and wondering, wow, you know, what an odd song to be playing. But then I got kind of sucked in by Alex's performance of that song, and you know, for those of you that know it, there are these incredible high falsetto parts and stuff that he would just nail, and it became less of a novelty song and more of a, well, I just became fascinated with just how, I mean, I knew that anyway, but you know, just how great of a voice Alex had, and what a great feel for delivering a song that he had.
John, and maybe Andy, I know Andy, obviously after a certain point you kind of got out of music and were in aerodynamics and not quite? Or were you? Oh, yeah. There's this sort of decade where, you know, the cult that we talked about, you know, of big stars really flowering. John, talk a little bit about that in terms of that decade, and you know, one of the interesting facets of Big Star's kind of revival or the interest is that one of the central characters, and Alex was probably not that interested in it. Talk a little bit, John, about that. Was it because Alex was always sort of looking forward to the next thing, or, you know, when it became clear that there was something to this, I guess leading up to the reunion in '93?
Well, yeah, you know, Alex, I mean, I think he really enjoyed playing the shows, the Big Star reunion shows. I mean, when I saw him, at least, and this is more recently, but when I saw him in London, you know, he was communicating with the audience and joking from the stage and in a good mood before and after and during the shows. But he really didn't, you know, like to particularly talk about or celebrate a lot of stuff that was in the past. And you know, it's hard to know what the reasons for that would be. But yeah, I mean, in '76, I thought, well, Big Star's through. We'll never hear anything about these records again. And then by '78, somebody calls me up and said, did you know that EMI leased #1 record in Radio City and put it out in England as a double vinyl? I said, no, I had no idea that they did. And then people started realizing that Sister Lover's Third existed, so that got out in Europe and in the U.S. on vinyl, and finally Fantasy, who had inherited the Stax Master catalog, purchased it and had rights to #1 record in Radio City. They finally came out of their slumbers and issued them in the U.S. when they noticed that they were selling in Europe. But in many ways, you could make an argument that a lot of the interest in Big Star that started up again was almost fed back from the UK and Europe into the United States.
Oh, and interestingly, even though Alex obviously had a sort of complicated relationship with Big Star, even at the end, and Chris, as many of you know, put out Chris Bell's Eye in the Cosmos, which was the only Chris Bell solo thing released during his life. And I guess label, you were, as you said, I didn't have a label. Well, tell me a little bit about that story. And it just shows even though Alex may have even, you know, come '78 was in his more, you know, like Flies on Sherbet phase, that he could still really appreciated, you know, the sort of pop greatness that, you know, Chris was capable of. Tell a little bit about that story, about putting it out and when he played it for you, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I had Alex and I had done some stuff for Terry Ork in New York, who'd put out the television 45, and a lot of it was never paid for, and I had a little label in North Carolina, so I called Carnivorous. We shortened it to Car Records, and I'd put out a few things. It was one of those labels at the time. A label was, you know, uptown with a lot of secretaries, but this was a label which was one guy in a bedroom. It wasn't, it's common now, but it was odd then. So we'd done a few things, and then Alex came over one day and he said, you know, Chris Bell has this song, and he kind of laughed, and I certainly don't mean this as any kind of disrespect at all, but I don't think he played it. He recited the first lines, which are breaking my heart this weekend, but every night I tell myself, I am the cosmos, I am the wind, that don't get you back again. And then he laughed, and it was like it was because he thought it was so perfect. It was the perfect couplet, and it was so much Chris Bell. And he said, you should put this record out. And I said, great. So it was basically I wanted to put the record out not based on ever hearing it, but because Alex sang a couple of lines to me. And then I guess I called Ardent and had asked Bell to hold up the telephone and play it over the speakers loud. And I said, that sounds great, let's put it out.
There were no emails.